Hello, everyone. This is your very first video in Unit 1, which is Designing Studies and Experiments. So since this is your first video, I'm going to kind of give you an idea of how these typically will go, how I lay them out. So on the left side of your screen, you'll see some slides, which is what I would normally kind of work through with you and talk through with you if we were physically in school. And on the right-hand side, you will see your student notes. So I'm going to kind of play both student and teacher here and show you how to fill these in and what notes to take. And obviously you can add other stuff to it if you want to, if you get other things while I'm talking about stuff and while I'm going through these statistics ideas. I am note-taking in Kami just because it makes it a little bit easier for me to type and draw things without changing the formatting of my original document, but you are more than welcome to make your edits in Google Docs if you prefer to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So this is the first video in section 1, which is on studies, observational studies. I'm going to split this section into 3 videos, I believe. So you'll have 3 videos for this section and then a couple of videos in the next section, which is on experiments. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. This is just like the basics, okay? So there's a couple of things that it's really important that you know, because it's the foundation of basically everything that we do in statistics. So the first is what a population is, and that's exactly what it sounds like, okay? A population is the entire group of individuals that we want information about. Okay, and we'll do some experiments and things when we're live together in class, so we'll pick out some of these, like the populations and things like that, okay? It is very difficult to get data from an entire population. That's really difficult. Remember, this class at its core is about a search for the truth, right? We are trying to find the truth about a population of people. So the only way to know that for sure, is to do what's called a census. Okay, a census collects data from every individual in the population. Now, individuals don't have to be people. In statistics, it's just any one individual person, place, thing, right? So just keep in mind, individuals don't have to necessarily be people, right? This is actually an interesting year to be doing this, right? Because we are in the midst of the 2020 census right now, which is what the government does every 10 years in order to gather information from every individual in the United States so that way they can make changes in government and funding and how many senators how many representatives each state gets, where those come from, district lines, all that fun stuff, right? But they only do it once every 10 years because it really is that difficult to collect data from every individual in the population, okay? But this is really the only way that we can know for sure that we're getting at the truth, because we're talking to every individual in the population and analyzing that data, right? Now, because that is so difficult to do, it's very rare that it actually happens in real life. Most of the time, what we do as statisticians is we take samples of people or individuals, I'll say. I really shouldn't say people, right? Because the individuals could be people, but they could also be cats or, pieces of wood, right? Okay, so a sample is a subset of individuals from the population from which we actually collect data. Okay, so we choose individuals, hopefully randomly. If your survey, your experiment, your study is designed well, you'll take a subset of these individuals randomly analyze their data, and then come to some conclusions about the whole population based on the data, right? And we'll kind of get into that a little bit later, okay? So what you actually give people is called a sample survey, right? Or like in a study, right? You're giving them a survey, right? So a sample survey or sample surveys are studies that use an organized plan. I could spell, that would be great. Choose a sample that represents a specific population, meaning it is representative of that population, right? That the small sample could be extrapolated essentially to encompass the whole population, that the conclusions that we draw from the sample survey or the study would be true for the whole population, or as true as we can get, okay? So a sample survey is not just for studies that include people taking actual surveys, right? So, I'm sure you've been sent tons of not formulas, oh my gosh, surveys on like Google Forms and all of this stuff. People asking like, take my survey, right? Or if you've ever gotten like a call on a landline, like at your house. I don't know if any of y'all have landlines anymore, right? But robocalls being like, please take this survey and enter this data about blah, 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 right? Okay, so a sample survey is not just for physical surveys that people take. It's any plan or way to collect data that is representative of a population, right? So it could be that you're working in a factory and you're going to go choose 10 items at random to inspect. You're going to pick them randomly. That is a sample survey. Okay? All right. So let's pick out what the population and sample is in each of these scenarios. So just so that you're aware, whenever you see a little question mark in your notes, that typically means there's a question that I'm asking you. So you can always pause the video if you want to try this on your own, and then come back and check it after you do it. Oops. Let me close that. Y'all are sending me messages. So you can do that, or you can just let the video keep playing if you want to and kind of do these along with me here. Okay. So if you want to pause the video and try these on your own, I'll give you a second to do that now. All right. So if you're still with me, that means we're going to try this together. So let's give it a go here. Okay. So here we're talking about furniture here. So furniture maker buys hardwood in large batches. The supplier is supposed to dry the wood, right? So the furniture maker, they say they chooses 5 pieces of wood from each batch to test their moisture content, right? So this is their survey, basically. They're kind of describing the survey here. Okay, so we have to pick out what the population is here and what the sample is. Okay, so the population here is just all the wood, so all the pieces of hardwood in a batch, right? So it's the whole population. The population is what we are trying to ascertain information about, and we care about each individual batch, right? So the population is all of the individual pieces of hardwood in that batch. So that means the sample is the 5 pieces of wood selected from the batch and tested at random. Okay. Let's say for moisture content. Oops. Okay. So, one thing I want to point out to you about the way that I wrote this and described it is that I'm being very specific and giving context to everything, right? Um, Numbers and statistics don't mean anything without context. So, you have to make sure that you provide that context. Okay. All right. So, let's look at number 2. It says each week the Gallup poll questions a sample of 1,500 adult US residents. Okay. So, that's helpful to know, right? To determine national opinion about something. That's true. We, as statisticians, get a lot of information from the Gallup poll. Okay, so the population here is what the group that we want to know things about, and that is adult US residents. Okay, and the sample, they straight out told us in the problem, right? The sample is the 1,500 adults who actually respond to the survey questions. Right? So that is sample and population. Okay. All right. So next thing I want to talk about, or the last thing really that I want to talk about in this video, is an introduction to bias, right? So what is bias? Okay. Um, Bias is kind of the bane of the statistician's existence, right? Our goal as statistician is to design studies and experiments that have as little bias as possible so that the results that we get, we can actually trust, right? And can actually be expanded to tell us the truth about a whole population, okay? So here is the statistical definition of bias, okay? Bias occurs when the design of a statistical study consistently underestimates or overestimates the value you want to know. Okay, so it's bias occurs because of a problem with the actual design of the study or experiment, right? That the statisticians who designed it forgot to include something, that there was a confounding variable or another variable that's affecting the study somehow, and it's causing the results of the study to veer away from the truth, right? So we're either underestimating or overestimating the true value from the population, the true value that we want to know, okay? And my AP tip here, right, this comes directly from the AP people, right, is that if you are asked to describe how a study leads to bias, you have to do 2 things, okay? You must identify the problem with the design, right? So tell us where the statisticians went wrong or the designers went wrong, and then explain how this leads to an underestimate or an overestimate. Okay. So basically, tell us what the problem is, and then tell us why or how it's a problem, right? Where, like, what the skewed results would be, right? And how that's happening. Okay. All right, and I'm going to do an example for you down here in just a second. Okay. All right. So this is just an introduction to bias, because there's lots of ways that you can sample badly, okay, and only a few ways that you can sample well. Our goal is to sample things well, right? So that way our sample is valid, the results are valid, and we can use them to tell a truth about the population. But here's a couple of bad sampling methods. Okay. First one is when you have a voluntary response sample. Okay, so that occurs when people choose themselves, right? Or they choose to include themselves in a study by responding to an open invitation, right? So that would be those like those internet polls that you see, or if you've ever voted on like a singing competition show, that they do on TV, like American Idol, The Voice, America's Got Talent, like all of those things, right? You are voluntarily participating in that study or that poll, okay? And the issue with voluntary responses is that really the only people, or most likely the people that are going to participate in a study like that, are people that have really strong feelings one way or the other. So either they're really in favor of something or they're really against something. And so we don't get a lot of those people who are neutral in the middle, right? I'm sure if you got sent an email that said, please participate in this poll about blah, 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 and you didn't care about it, you probably would not waste your time with it. You probably wouldn't respond to it, right? But somebody who really cares deeply about that issue, either because they really love it or they really hate it, are much more likely to respond. Okay, so that's the issue with the voluntary response samples. Okay? Another way that you can sample badly is to have what's called a convenience sample. Okay, so a convenience sample is exactly what it sounds like, where we pick individuals, so people or animals, whatever it is that you're surveying, right? We're picking them because they're easy to reach, right? So it would be like if you were standing in a room full of products at a factory. Say you're in a factory that makes cell phones, right? And you want to get a random sample, or not a random sample. You just wanted to inspect a sample of those cell phones, right? But you don't want to move because you're being lazy, right? So you would just pick up the 10 or 20 cell phones that were closest to you. You wouldn't try to go digging through to get a random group of cell phones, right? And then another example that I gave you here in your notes on the right-hand side is that if we use our class as a sample to estimate the proportion of high school students who own a graphing calculator, okay? We'll say who own a graphing calculator, okay? This is 100% a convenience sample, right? Because if I was conducting this survey, right, you all are the easiest group of students for me to contact, right? I don't have to dig through all of, every email of every student in the school. I don't have to pick them randomly, right? I'm just going to say, I'm going to use you all, my AP stats class, right? But there are things that you all have in common that may not be true of everybody else in the school. So, for example, we are likely to have a higher proportion of graphing calculators than other groups in the school, right? Because you all chose to take this advanced math course, right? So you are much more likely to own a graphing calculator than just say any other random Valley student, right? So what happens is if we use our class and we say that what happens in our class is true for the whole school, this is probably an overestimate of what's actually going on in our whole Valley population, our true population proportion, right? Our sample proportion will likely be higher than the population proportion, right? Because we used a convenience sample. So you end up with not necessarily a bias, but it's a bad sampling method, right? Which leads to, well, I guess it is a bias, right? It leads to an issue with our data, right? And pulls us farther away from what's actually true, okay? So let's figure out what's wrong with each of these, okay? So if you would like to try this question on your own, you absolutely can do so. I'll give you a second to pause the video and try it on your own if you want to. All right. So either you tried this on your own and you're back with us. If so, welcome back. Or you're letting the video play through, which is, totally fine. You do you. Live your best life. Okay, so let's talk about or think about what's wrong with each of these samples. Okay, so the first says, I'm asking the first 30 students in the library how much time they spend on their homework. Okay, so the reason that this is a problem, okay, is that this is a convenience sample, right? It's very easy for me to just stand outside the library and ask the first 30 students, if we were actually at school, right, who come in, how much time they spend on homework, okay? So there is a possible bias here, right? Because if you think about what kind of kids spend a lot of time in the library, right? So the kids that are spending a lot of time in the library likely care more about their grades and they're likely to spend more time on their homework. So that's where the possible bias is, okay? Students who use the library often are more likely to care about their grades and spend more time on homework. Okay, which would lead us to, this could lead us to an overestimation. No, this is, I'm struggling with my text was too big. Oh no. Let's make that text a little smaller so we can actually see what's happening here. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so that you all can see everything in this smaller space. So this leads or could lead to an overestimation of the time Valley students spend on homework. All right. So again, here, I followed my AP tip that I had up at the top. I identified the problem, which is this part, and then talked about how this could lead to an overestimation, right? Talked about the overestimation, and here's how, all right? Okay, then the last one here, number 2, says a text-in poll about opinions on current political candidates. So again, this is one of those, you're volunteering to participate. So this is a voluntary response sample. Okay, so the reason that this is a problem is that individuals who have strong opinions are more likely to participate in the poll, and we will likely miss people who have neutral opinions. Okay, and depending on how many people call in or text in, it could lead to an overestimation if more people who favor that candidate text in, but it could also lead to an underestimation of support or opinions if more people who dislike the candidate text in. Right? So sometimes a situation could go one way or the other, right? So you kind of have to talk about those things. And put it in the context of the problem. Always go back to the context of the problem. Right? So especially when you're talking about consequences, right? Or possible biased outcomes, right? Okay, so that is the end of this like intro part here for studies. Next video will be on random sampling methods and types. There are a couple that you'll need to know and know how to do. And then the last video for this section on studies talks about inference and how we can take information from studies and make educated guesses about the true values, the population values, right? So I will see you all in the next video. Bye.